This is the Spycraft 101 podcast. Welcome to your clandestine classroom. This is episode number 208 of the Spycraft 101 podcast. My guest today is William Bill Ray. Bill is a retired Army major and a Department of Defense civilian with more than 50 years of service as an intelligence and counterintelligence officer, including 20 years in Europe. During his career, he spent over 3.5 years as a remote viewer at Fort Meade, including as the unit commander from 1985 to 1987, along with my previous podcast guest, Dr. Paul Smith, from episode 201. I invited Bill onto the podcast to hear about his decades in counterintelligence, both during and after the Cold War, and his experiences as a remote viewer with Project Stargate. By the way, if you're looking for a new way to get friends and family as interested in history as you are, or if you want to learn something new and unexpected every month, then make sure to check out History by Mail. Every month, History by Mail will send you reproductions of famous and influential historical documents from American history. Accompanying the documents themselves are articles which put them in the context of their times and help you understand the impact they had on the course of American life. The topics are widely varied, so you're always learning something new across themes that include historic inventions, American wars, and foreign diplomatic relations. I'm really enjoying my own subscription because it's opened my eyes to historic events I knew nothing about. You can subscribe for yourself or gift a subscription at historybymail.com for as little as $6.50 a month. Just click the link in the show notes of this episode and use the discount code JUSTIN10 for a permanent 10% off your subscription. Bill, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Justin. Very excited.
Of course. I've been hoping for the chance to talk to you for a long time, so I'm finally glad that Paul was able to put us in touch after he and I spoke.
Well, I'm excited to get this going.
Great. So I want to go back. 50-year career. That's incredible. Honestly, going all the way back to the beginning, what was it that led you to join the Army in the first place?
Well, it was strange. It was 66 years ago, and one day I ended up at the meth station in Los Angeles, California. I've been accused of being an adrenaline junkie. I enlisted airborne unassigned, which was a daring thing to do, but pretty stupid looking at it.
Oh, wow.
I ended up in the 101st Airborne at the time. At the time, I was an airborne unit. I spent 3 years there in Kentucky. Went to Ranger School. That sounded like a wonderful idea. It wasn't, but I graduated from there. Yeah. Strangely enough, in 2013, the last unit I was with was in Afghanistan. It was the 101st. So it kind of sandwiched my career in there between those two dates.
Very cool. Very cool. So your first enlistment, you were not intelligence, as you said, just infantry and paratrooper,
yes,
right?
Airborne infantry, running through the woods, going bang, bang. Later on, I finally figured out being cold, tired, wet, and hungry all the time wasn't fun, and I managed to get into Army intelligence.
Okay, so what was it about that career field that kind of impressed you to begin with that made you want to make the switch?
Well, I had a very good friend from high school who ended up graduating college and went in as an officer. And he ended up in CI, counterintelligence. So that's where I first heard of it. I was still on a break from service. I hadn't decided to go back in yet, though I was leaning that way.
Okay, I see. Yeah, it sounds tantalizing. Of course, I can see why it piques the interest of a lot of people. And I'm sure it was completely different from your previous tour. Was it difficult? Was there like a difficult selection process to get in? I mean, did you have to be a college graduate to start with or anything like that?
No, I actually, in 68, my two brothers joined the Marine Corps together and ended up in Vietnam. They were both quite a bit younger than I was, and I didn't like to see anybody deploy, but if anybody was deployed, I should be there too, which came back into play later on. So I basically enlisted, go back in the Army with the intention of going to Vietnam. I was an airborne ranger, so I figured it'd be no problem getting me back in the infantry. Unfortunately, there was. I ended up in the Signal Corps, listening to dits and dots. I rapidly got out of that and then ended up in the MP Corps, which was an option at the time. Spent 2 years in the MP Corps and then volunteered for counterintelligence. I had to be recommended by the agent. I was at Fort Belvoir with the 521st MP Company. Went into D.C., took several tests, did several interviews, got recommended for MI. That was 1971. We left Fort Belvoir. I was a staff sergeant at the time and ended up at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, going through the counterintelligence agents course as a staff sergeant.
Okay, I see. And I understand that you also speak German, so is that something that you learned after you became an agent?
Yes. After graduating the course, I was sure I was going to Vietnam. Instead, they sent me to German language school. I called branch and asked to be sent to Vietnam, and they said, "No, you're going to be language qualified." And I said, "Yeah, well, what if I fail?" They said, "Don't even think about it." So I graduated and ended up going to Frankfurt, Germany, the 165th Military Intelligence Battalion. Worked out of the Frankfurt field office for about 3 years. About that time, I was approaching the maximum age to be an officer. I was 32 and a half, which was the cutoff to go to OCS. Warrant officer was closed at the time, so I volunteered for officer candidate school and made it. They sent me to Fort Benning to go through infantry officers candidate school. I was almost 33. The next oldest guy in my class was 27. Halfway through the course, they dropped the age down to 26. So I ended up being the oldest lieutenant, captain, and major in the military eventually.
Oh, my
in the
gosh.
Army, yes.
Wow. That's unique, certainly. So did you go back to Germany then as an officer and as a counterintelligence agent after that?
I kind of thought that's what I'd be doing, but I ended up I had to go through some basic courses as an officer, which I'd already attended as a sergeant. So I ended up back at Fort Huachuca. They recruited me to stay there. So as a second lieutenant, I stayed at Fort Huachuca teaching Army intelligence for 3 years to a lot of people who I was older than, but they were senior in grade to me.
Okay, I see. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun, honestly, teaching at the schoolhouse itself.
Yes.
Did you wind up back in like a field office or something like that after that assignment?
Yes. After 77, I received orders back to the 66 MI group in Munich, and I ended up for a year at the headquarters. About that time, the command slot up in Augsburg opened up. That was the CI field office supporting 7 Corps Artillery, the largest SCIF, Sensitive Compartment Information Facility in Augsburg, and also about the whole western half of Bavaria. Went there for 3 years. While I was there, I got back to school going nights. I managed to finally get my bachelor's degree. I think I was 39 years old and also got my master's degree 2 years later. So it was a good assignment for education for me. And then I went back to the Fort Huachuca to go through the officer's advanced course.
Dang, just one school after another for you, it sounds like. My gosh.
So I'm overly educated.
So I was wondering, as a German-speaking counterintelligence agent in Germany in the 70s, was that like a very high-demand skill, or were you in high demand just for your resume almost at that time, like in Augsburg or in Munich when you were there?
Yes, actually, there were quite a few MI personnel, both sergeants and officers, who spoke German. There were times where I'd be called in to translate to a German general something that was going on, or we'd be out providing real-world counterintelligence support to some exercise, Reforge or whatever, and end up having to translate what tactics were going on and that kind of thing. Yes.
Okay, I see. So you were using the language skills in like a liaison role rather than like, for example, like, human intelligence, like speaking with a source.
I was running sources, German sources. So yes, I was using it there too, but kind of impromptu liaison, if you will. I'd just be passing through and somebody would say, you're a German Sprecher. We need to translate this. And I'd go and do that. Interesting. This is the late 70s, early 80s in Germany. It's the days of the Bader-Meinhof gang, the Rote Brigade, the Rosa Brigade, the RAF. And this was a time of a lot of counterterrorism going on, which was very interesting. Also, the whole structure of intelligence changed from 74 to 80. We had the Privacy Act of 1974 came in, limiting what we could do.
Hmm.
And then when President Carter came in, he also cut back a lot of the options that we could do.
Really? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know. Like on a federal scale as well. I know about like the church committee hearings, that were going on
oh
then.
yes,
That
yep,
I don't know if that had any effect on the army at the time, but
yeah,
clearly on the intelligence
it
community.
had a huge effect in Europe, and
Okay.
I'm also sure in Asia. People became very leery about approving any kind of operations.
Mm,
It was a
okay. Yeah.
frustrating time.
Yeah. I can see that when you're watching people sweat it out, right in front
Yes,
of Congress like that on TV every night, for weeks at a time. That can
right.
that can make someone very risk averse. Certainly.
We
Just like
had
you said, there
a
was a lot going on.
yep. I was at Flak Kaserne in Augsburg. We had a Beobachtens Zwei terrorist in Augsburg at the time. She was female, Beobachtens Zwei, Beobachtens watch. So the Germans had a open case on her, and anytime they saw her, they were authorized to surveil her. But they had problems because she was coming on U.S. concerns, talking to U.S. soldiers.
Oh wow.
So they asked, if we see her heading towards a concern, which is a post, if we call ahead, could you guys pick up surveillance? And I assured them we could, which was probably way above my pay grade. But it turns out that I had to have permission from U.S. Army Europe all the way up in Heidelberg. I submitted the request, and 8 months later, we had not received permission to surveil this terrorist who was coming on a U.S. base.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That's all right. That's a little much.
yeah.
That,
In fact, one Sunday I was in catching up on work, and as I was leaving work, her car passed me. So I swung around to see where she was going and went back to the office and reported it up right away. And the question was, why was I on post on Sunday? Was I following her? So they
oh
weren't
my gosh.
concerned about a terrorist on the post. They were concerned about an army captain using initiative, I guess.
Wow. That's incredible. I'm not familiar with her. Had she already committed violent acts, or was she just like associating with other people in that group at that point?
Yes, and I'm trying to come up with the names of the terrorist groups of the two leaders, one male, one female. The female had traveled using her passport. She was basically support personnel. She had lost 4 passports, which she
Hmm.
passed to the female terrorists.
Oh, I see.
We
Okay.
were in Bavaria, which is where the terrorists were hanging out at the time, but they weren't conducting operations. They were conducting operations further north in Hesse, and North Rhine was failing, but they were staying down in Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, the other southern German state.
Hmm. Wow, that's incredible to me that she would just be passing through post and you couldn't do anything. Like, whoa, where's your 8 levels of permission before
Yeah.
you find out what she's up to? That's amazing. Was that a response to the Privacy Act and Church Committee and that sort of thing, or were they normally that concerned about paperwork ahead of time?
They had not been. We had a pretty much free reign, and to be honest, the army had kind of abused that. In the mid 70s, we were listening to phone calls of Americans with the help of the Germans. That all broke, and a lot of the problem I don't think was related to the factual issues, but the powers that be, the colonels were loath to go ahead and approve anything because they were afraid with a liberal government they would get in trouble, which I think I never heard of anybody getting in trouble, but it was a fear on their part. We had several assets in Augsburg that were aware of the restraints on
Hmm.
army intelligence, and basically when somebody said, I'm going to report you, they would say, go ahead, you can't do anything.
Golly.
Yep.
That's amazing. One hand tied behind your back. I mean, I do understand, like you said, that there were some abuses of rights that came before that, which kind of led to this, but still there's, that's a close in target there as a known terrorist, traversing an army base. That's amazing.
Yes, it was.
Wow. So besides this one, are there any other like major investigations or operations that are like well known publicly now that you were involved in during this time?
During this time, we made several arrests, basically of Germans, and they were in bilateral operations with the MAD, Militärische Abschirmdienst, the German military intelligence. We worked very closely with them. So there were probably arrests that were more well known in Germany than back in the States here. And the German court system is pretty lenient on espionage cases, with 2 or 3 year sentences usually. So,
really interesting. Yeah, not to get off on a tangent, really, but I'm always like consistently surprised by sentencing because I cover, a lot of different espionage cases here on the
yes,
podcast and writing. And, once in a while somebody will get 35 years and another person will get four
yeah,
and a half years or something. And there's not a whole lot of rhyme and rhythm to it from what I can see. Honestly, I'd love to talk to like a prosecuting attorney, one day from National Security Division of DOJ or something
yes.
like that one day to get a handle on that.
Yep, it's my understanding that most espionage cases don't come to trial; they're resolved before that. If we can get a damage assessment, it might be worth more than getting a prosecution. Or if we can start passing false information back to the espionage agent, then the bad guys won't know when the information turned bad. So they're a lot of times the not only don't the cases come to light, they don't come to trial.
Oh, sure. Yeah, prosecution is not the only tool,
Right.
That's appropriate every time, of course. But I also, I've noticed so many times, very few people actually are sentenced or found guilty or sentenced for espionage itself. Oftentimes it seems to be like failure to register as a foreign agent or some related charge like that. So it seems like espionage is tough to make stick sometimes.
Yep. Well, it's more of a sure thing.
Yeah.
Take the sure conviction or get them to plead to a lesser charge, and you won't have to go to trial. And a lot of times we don't want to expose what the information that was being sold or stolen.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And it does. I get the sense anyway that people get offered these pretty sweetheart plea deals specifically so it doesn't go to trial.
Yep.
Because a lot of guys plead guilty to stuff that I would, as a amateur historian, I would love for them to go to trial because I want to see some evidence, that's eventually comes into the public view, but that often does not happen.
Yes. Well, the Ames case is an example of that. Yeah, Ames was the CIA higher up who was passing information, and they cut a deal with him. And one of my friends worked on it from the Army side, and they agreed that if he would pass all the information as damage control, everything he had passed to the Russians, if he would give us all of that, then they would not prosecute his wife, who also was involved. I think they had a 10-year-old child. And he agreed to that. The kicker was that Ames was alcoholic and really couldn't remember much of what he passed.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that was smart, and I can understand why he would take that deal. But I can see how the American people, John Q. Public, they're going to feel kind of let down sometimes by these sentences. Like, this guy was betrayed our country, and he's going to be out in 7 years or something. That's an understandable reaction.
I think he got life, but his wife got off scot-free.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
She could raise the child, which was
Yeah, a lot of interesting twists and turns in these cases once they actually result in an arrest and trial and all that. So, Bill, eventually, of course, I know that you were involved in Stargate or the various programs under that. So can you talk about how that first came to your attention and what brought you into the program?
Okay. Well, I came back from Germany, from Augsburg, in 1981, and I ended up going to the advanced course. And as I moved into my government quarters, the person across from me was Captain Skip Atwater. Now, Skip had worked for me back in the 74 to 77 time period when I was teaching at the intelligence school, and he had been one of the assistant instructors. Skip was working on his master's degree, was a Spanish linguist, had been through the debugging course. He was a very bright young man. He had 9 years in the service. 10 years was the max to be commissioned at that time. And I started harassing him, trying to get him to go to OCS. And eventually I did. And so Skip went to OCS, and he came back from after graduating as a second lieutenant, came back through the school, going through the same courses that I'd had to go through after going to OCS. He was getting ready to go to Fort Meade to a operational security assignment, which is a very boring assignment for a CI officer. And so we got together at a little club there piece, and we had a last beer together. I never thought I would see him again. He was a Spanish linguist. I was a German linguist. We were probably going different ways. But he ended up right across from me in 81. The thing is, when he went to Fort Meade to be this OPSEC officer, he read Hal Puthoff's book on remote viewing, became fascinated by it, and pushed to get an Army unit involved in that. And he did. He got one. And Skip was probably the only person who could do that. He had a lot of out-of-body experiences as a child and was pretty much read into that kind of community. So he's the one who set up the project at Fort Meade. When we got together, it was a special access program, SAP, so we couldn't talk about it. He left. I stayed at Fort Huachuca. I was supposed to go to another language school, Western European, and then on to an assignment at some embassy. And I ended up doing an 18-month tour in the meantime as the G2 of the 11th Sigma Brigade. Along the way, Skip gave me a phone call and then flew out. Basically showed me I think it was 60 Minutes, did a tape on the Hal Puthoff Russell Targ book and what they were doing. And Skip asked if I'd be interested and read me on. Shortly thereafter, Colonel Busby, who was the project commander at the time, flew out, took Sandy and I to dinner, and we talked about it. And we agreed that that's something we would like to do. So January 3rd, 1984, I ended up at Fort Meade. I was the second ranking person there, right behind Colonel Busby. So I kind of functioned not only as a viewer, but as an executive officer, kind of a confidant for Colonel Busby. Shortly after getting there, we left for San Francisco up at SRI for 2 weeks at Palo Alto, getting introduced to remote viewing and Ingo Swann. And for about the next 9 months to a year, we traveled every other week up to New York to be trained by Ingo. And there were 4 of us, myself, Paul Smith, Ed Dames, and Charlene Schufelt. Then there was Tom, who traveled on the other week. So those were the 5 people who were trained by Ingo Swann.
Okay. Sounds like a very interesting start there. So there's, clearly, like, as you said, there's not any like instruction from the military in this brand new discipline there. So you were exclusively learning. Did you feel a lot of eyes on you right from the beginning? Like, did this program have a lot of visibility, or was it like virtually unknown to higher ranks to start with?
The program was a SAP, a special access program. So the only way you could know about it was to be read on, which is sometimes can be difficult when you're collecting intelligence for other agencies because they don't know you exist. Yeah, people knew we were there. People knew we were strange, but they didn't know quite what we did yet. So
sure,
it was an interesting time. Yep.
I'll bet. So you mentioned Skip had some out-of-body experience as a kid. Did you have any experience with anything paranormal at all? Like, did you need a lot of convincing before you volunteered to begin with?
No. In fact, I was a psychic rock. There was nothing. Now, my wife, Sandy, we had a child who was born early and only lived 3 months and died. Through the Catholic Church, we became members of a charismatic prayer group. And Sandy would have all kinds of visions and things, and all I ever saw was a brick wall. Sandy had also had a near-death experience back in 70 where her gallbladder burst and she almost died. It was interesting. When I was traveling up to New York with Ingo was writing a book on the Virgin Mary, and Sandy was getting automatic writing, which I would take up to him, and then he would take a message, give me a message to take back to Sandy. But no, I had absolutely no ability. In fact, I can remember before my first remote viewing session, I thought, well, other people can do this. I know, I believe it, but yeah, maybe I can't. It's that self-doubt. Fortunately, I could.
Oh, wow. Was it harder for you compared to the other remote viewers initially, or is this something that like anybody can cultivate?
It's something anybody can cope with. Yeah, Charlene and I finished stage 1 training fairly early, Ed Dames and Paul Smith went back up to New York for another 3 or 4 weeks to get some more training before they passed. So it's something anybody can learn. It's a skill we all have. It's like riding a bicycle. Everybody can ride a bicycle eventually, but some people do the Tour de France, and other people have a hard time getting from here to the grocery store.
Okay. I see. That's a good analogy. Okay, understandable. So, how quickly? I know you mentioned this 9-month training period there. How quickly did you start doing the operational sessions and actually viewing real targets?
I think it was about 9 months we started. Yep. Ingo
Um,
taught a very specific 6-step method, and that progressed from step 1 to step 6, obviously. I believe and that's called controlled remote viewing. But the only hard part, in my opinion, is step 1. And once you get past that, everything kind of just keeps flowing. There was a second way to work, and it's called extended remote viewing. Involves achieving an altered state and then kind of going to the target. I preferred working ERV, and once I learned how to do that, I was given a choice, and it was up to the operations officer. He would pick, which was Skip, and he would pick how many people were going to work it, and what technology they would use, CRV or ERV. Yep, I think I became pretty much operational about the 9-month period.
okay. Can you talk about the conditions that you set for a session? Like you in a dark room by yourself? Or, I mean, like sitting at a desk writing, or what exactly?
Okay, the 2 ways to do it, and I'll cover both of them if we have time here.
Sure.
Controlled remote viewing, you would go into a very gray, nondescript room, sit down, lights are on, the monitor is at the other end of the table, and he would give you a geographic coordinate, longitude and latitude. We eventually changed that, and we started giving coded coordinates, and we had no decrease in accuracy. But you would sit there and you would start with stage 1, do what's called an ideogram, and then decode it, and then move through the stages. Once you reach stage 4, Ingo said that you were operational, and I agree with that. The other way was the extended remote viewing, which involves going into a darkened room, laying down, getting comfortable, maybe put a blanket over yourself. The monitor would come in with a little red light on his head so he could take notes. He'd also have a plug in his ear, and there would be somebody in the control room, Skip or sometimes myself, listening in and directing the monitor where to go next. And the monitor's job was basically keeping the viewer in the zone, if you will, not going too high or too low. And the monitor would say, okay, now he said there's 3 buildings there. Ask him, are they multi-storied or single-storied? And then the person on the outside would kind of direct the monitor. Now, there always wasn't a person on the outside. Sometimes the monitor would be on his own. And towards the end, that became the standard way we did it. But it was, at the time, we had 2 secretaries at the project out of the 12 people we had. And we needed 2 secretaries to decode what the viewer was saying in this altered state. It was kind of like he had a mouthful of oatmeal and then put some marbles in and was trying to talk. So it was, a little hard to understand them.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. And did these last a few minutes or a few hours typically?
They lasted, I would say, an hour to an hour and a half. I did one session that went 3 hours, and that's a long time to be on what we call the signal line. It's tiring. It does take a lot out of you.
Okay. I see. Yeah, it sounds like it could be physically draining. Once you come back once you complete the session, do you recall everything that happened? Like, are you fully cognizant of the whole experience afterwards?
Yes, or pretty much. Sometimes you have to be coaxed by, when you're doing the summary, the monitor will say, well, you talked about that chamber where they had this devices, and yeah. But the advantage of extended remote viewing or control remote viewing over out-of-body experiences that while you're there, you can report back. If you're doing an OBE, out-of-body experience, you're there, and until you come back to your body, there's no reporting going on. So you have to remember what you did. Plus, there's no way the monitor or anybody else can ask you to clarify something or go in more detail on a certain part of the target.
Okay, interesting. I'm curious because this was so new for the Army. Were there any like quantifiable milestones that you were expected to hit? Like what? How was success measured for your unit while you were there, or what was there any expectation really?
That's interesting. I'm trying to phrase this very carefully. When Brian Busby left in 85, I took over as the commander. We were more alone than any other unit I've ever been in. Intelligence unit. We would go brief the senior INSCOM guy on what we were doing. They didn't ask us to come brief them. We would go brief. Okay, we're working on this case for the CIA, and we have this case for the FBI, and this one for the National Security Council, and this one's 2/3 done. But nobody knew that unless we went and told them. It was kind of a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, when I was commander, I kept the requirements for accepting a case from an agency the same as if we were doing a physical investigation, a surveillance or whatever. We needed a case number.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be a case number. It had to be an open case, and we would go ahead and work with you.
Okay. Okay, very cool. I can understand that. So you're meeting would you describe it as like meeting a client's needs? Is that accurate, kind of?
And
okay.
We did work for everybody else. Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Including the Army, of course. But towards the end, towards the time we left the Army, we were doing a lot of work for a lot of other agencies.
That's interesting. So you mentioned it was a special access program. So was word getting out to the appropriate people then over time?
We would go out and brief people, and we would bring the
see.
book, and they had to sign that they were willing to take a polygraph. And if that was the case, then we could read them on. So we were trying to expand it. We had points of contact at the CIA and National Security Council, people who'd been read on. Shortly after I took over, we ended up at DIA. Jack Verona, who was the lead scientist in the Department of Defense and the head of science and technology for DIA, would have a monthly meeting down the Pentagon where he and I would go down. The Air Force thought we were doing the devil's work, I think, but several Army units would be there, general officers, NSA, CIA, NSC would all send representatives. And then I would brief on what we did the previous month, and then we could take tasking. The problem was if I heard the tasking, then I could not work the session.
Oh yeah.
One of the key rules is the viewer has to be blind. You can't know what you're going after, otherwise imagination will take over.
Sure.
I'd get asked, Bill, could you guys do this? And I would say, well, my team can, but I can't now. But I would try leave, and Jack would take in these things and then set them up.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to keep the environment, I guess, sterile.
Yes.
For them. I am curious. I know one famous case that the unit was involved in was the kidnapping of General Dozier, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Were you there at that time when that occurred?
I wasn't, but I've talked to the people involved in it. And unfortunately, we really weren't involved in the kidnapping. We were still working for the Army at the time. And the premier remote viewer at that time was Joe McMonagle, who worked at extended remote viewing, not the control type. It came down when Dozier got captured. Jack Verona got two civilian viewers who I had met and was unimpressed by. But he got these two, at least two, I think. There may have been more. But they flew into Italy, not going through customs. And they were trying to find out where Dozier was. In the meantime, we worked Joe back at the project. Joe found Dozier fairly easy, but this is the search problem. It's one thing that remote viewing does not do well. because you can find somebody, but where are you? If you're looking for a body and you say, okay, the body's here, there's an old farmhouse and there's a railway bridge over a river and the river's got a bend, and the FBI says, I don't know where that is, but the local sheriff may say that's the old Smith place. So you're better off working for locals in that case. But Joe went back, found Dozer on this, I think, second story of this place he described. And the question became, where are you? And Joe was trying to come up with a way. And he finally said, Padilla. And they came back and said, well, how do you know it was Padilla? I said, well, I went back 300 years and met this bishop and asked him what he was. He said he was the Archbishop of Padilla.
Oh, my goodness.
That didn't get reported up because DIA was doing with these two civilian remote viewers. Yep. Now, the story was relayed to me. I wasn't there. Yeah.
But did he ultimately turn out to be in Padilla then?
Yes, he was.
General Dozier?
Yeah. And
Wow,
my understanding is the building that Joe described was pretty much right on.
Oh, my gosh. That's incredible. Yeah, that was something very interesting from Paul's book, was in so many cases, because these are such hard targets, it's often hard to get any kind of feedback on it and verification. But I know that a few were verified. A few sessions were kind of verified like years and years later, like after the Soviet Union collapsed. But I can see you guys really had your work cut out for you, with so little chance of seeing other, ways of seeing inside of a Soviet research facility or something like that.
We had a briefing book, called it the Red Book. And in it, we had several of the more fantastic successes, if you will, that we could brief on. But we kept track of every case that we worked, who we worked it for, and the results of the case. Now, normally what you do is an intelligence collector will submit an intelligence information report, an IIR, to meet a certain requirement. If you get 10% back saying this was of some value, you feel pretty good about that. Now, of our cases, 50% came back as rated by the customer as of exceptionally high value. Now, they aren't saying we were just correct. We're saying we were correct, and the information was not available anyplace else till later.
Oh, wow.
And as you said, a lot of the cases we worked, there was no feedback on for 2 or 3 years. I was down at the FBI one Friday talking to my contact down there about something, and I got ready to head back up to Fort Meade. Norm said, wait a minute, I got something for you. Went over to a safe and gave me a top secret document. I said, well, thanks, Norm. I said, this was a case you worked long before you got here. I said, okay, where do I sign for it? And he said, no, that's an extra copy. Now, you don't do extra copies of top secret documents. It was obvious they didn't want a record of where it went. So I said, well, can I use your phone? Because we weren't authorized at the project to store top secret. So I called the office and told them, would you please call over to the SCIF? Make sure they stay open till I get back there. By the way, would you send me an appointment up on Monday to get read on for the G word? So, but that was maybe 3 years after we had originally worked the target. We got something back on it.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I can see how difficult that would be. It's good now with hindsight that you were vindicated, there, but that's a long 3 years to go without any kind of confirmation at all, I'm sure.
Well, we counted that as a failure up, and then all of a sudden it was a success.
I see.
And of course, the CIA was tickled with it because
I'll bet. So, Bill, I've heard you in another interview. You spoke about a very frightening viewing session that you had. Is that something you're ready to share with us or willing to share again?
Sure.
It sounded like it was pretty traumatizing, honestly.
Yeah, I would do that. Yes, I think what you're referring to was a session I worked in April '85. Skip Atwater monitored me. This was the longest session I ever worked, well over 2.5 hours. It's the only session that I've ever been reluctant to go to the target. I picked up a Navy ship sailing on waters, and everything was calm and quiet, and then it was morning and the ship was empty. And Skip had to move me back and then move me forward until I finally got to the target. I have the summary I did at that time. If we have time, I'll read it to you.
Yeah, by all means. Thank you.
Okay. And this is the summary I wrote after being on target for almost 3 hours. On an ocean a short distance from a coast in 1981, there is a ship. I knew it was 1981 because we'd gone back in time 4 years. So that kind of figured that out. This ship has a military feeling. It is smaller than a destroyer. There are only men on board. They are wearing clean white uniforms, maybe white shorts. The men are young for the most part and are athletic. They are on a routine mission. There is a second group of people involved. They are in a large, shiny, metallic silver craft, which looks like this, and I drew a triangular UFO for want of a better word. The second group of people are unemotional, programmed, ordered, disciplined, interlinked, interconnected, interrelated, and intertwined. They are cold and unpleasant. They are lean, sterile, and white, not further identified. They are returning and gathering, not further identified. I get no impression of any sex differences among these people. The afternoon is sunny and bright and the ocean is calm. The men on the Navy boat go to a state of alert, like battle stations. There is a routine feeling here. This is planned and has been rehearsed. There is a feeling of confidence. Everyone knows their jobs, and the man in charge knows what he is doing. Time passes. Around sunset or early evening, I think, an unexpected event occurs. A shadow falls across the boat. The water is tossing and rising in the vicinity of the boat. It almost looks like the sea is boiling. There is mist, vapor, and steam around the boat. The mist is damp and is of several colors. I do not recall what those are, and I feel that it is not important. There is complete panic and confusion on the boat. Men are screaming and hollering, and many are running aimlessly. Others are terrified and screaming, but remain where they are at their stations. The ship smells of insanity and fear. No one knows what to do. No one can take charge. There is a feeling, not a color, of red and black, like a photographic negative. I cannot explain that any better. There is a tremendous feeling of gravity here. Skin is pulled tight across the cheekbones. Arms are incredibly heavy, and I have a difficult time moving my feet off the deck. I believe all this turmoil is being caused by the cold, unemotional group of people in the strange shaped craft which is hovering over the ship. After a time, the strange shaped craft rises up and goes west over the land, and all becomes calm and quiet. There is a salty, clean wind blowing from the north. I believe the ship is floating in the water, quiet and empty. No living person on board. Then we went to stage 5, where I basically interrogate my subconscious. There is a feeling of entering the craft. This entering is forced and temporary. The attributes of this entering are several and previous. Up light. Is resistant and is not resistant are also other subjects of this. The subject of the entering is experiment and learning. The topics of the entering are ongoing, biological, developing, encompassing scientific, social, material research, categorizing, cataloging, and developing. There is something important underwater near the site, something to do with bubbles and hidden, sensitive, secretive, selective colony. The subject is life and ecology. Its topics are deep, dark, sustaining, nourishing, acrobatic, but I spelled that phonetically, elongated, and saline. I did 5 combat tours in the Mideast, and I've been terrified. I've been through Ranger School. I've jumped out of airplanes, and I was very afraid. When I think back to those times, I can remember So, yeah, I was afraid then. I am terrified right now from just reading that. It's not a normal fear. As to say, it smelled of insanity.
My gosh. Yeah, I cannot imagine. That's a deeply disturbing narrative there. Just, hearing you read it across the room there is astonishing. That feeling of gravity and the face stretched, the skin stretched across the cheekbones, like you mentioned, it's extremely disturbing, honestly.
Obviously, I got sucked in. And right
Wow.
now, the hairs on my arm are standing up.
Oh my gosh. So you said this took place in 1981. Were you able to tie it to a disappearance or anything in 81
No,
afterwards?
no, I haven't. I think Skip did the targeting, obviously, for a reason. I'm not sure what that was. I think he had information of the Flying Dutchman scenario there.
Mm.
I did look up the Bay of St. Augustine, and according to the MUFON, there is a secret alien base underwater close to the bay. This is what I saw and what I felt. Strangely enough, Joe McMonagle worked this probably about a year before I did. Got pretty much the same thing. Tom McNair worked it and just had a very hard time ahead of time with what was going on there. But Paul Smith worked it and had too many advances of UFO. It was too front loaded to actually work the site.
Mm. Mm.
And I think those are the four of us who worked it. But Joe and I were the two who stuck with it, and it was a very difficult site, and it's the only site that I've had trouble with. That my subconscious didn't want me to go there.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, I can certainly imagine that's incredibly foreboding. This Bay of St. Augustine that you mentioned, is this like in the Pacific Ocean? It's not part of the United States,
No, it's off the
right?
coast of Argentina.
Argentina. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
and
I got you.
the boat, from what I can gather, was an Argentine minesweeper, which is smaller than a destroyer.
Hmm. Okay. Wow, yeah, that's incredible. My gosh. So, as you said, you were later the commander for Stargate. What was it like when the program switched over to Defense Intelligence Agency later on? Did you have to manage that transition yourself?
Yes. First of all, there were actually four agencies that wanted us. The DIA with Jack Verona, who'd kind of been a patron of ours. The CIA wanted us. NSA wanted us. Last agency that wanted us was the Medical R&D Command up at Fort Ritchie on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. And
Mm.
we'd been to all those places. I was leaning towards going with the CIA, but they got caught mining the harbor in Nicaragua.
Oh yeah.
And they decided that they couldn't do anything that might might be considered far out. So they said we'll have to back out.
I
I
see.
was worried that if we went to NSA, we'd be doing ComSec, working for Dr. Scott at that time, who was the head of ComSec for NSA, which I thought would be very boring, and we would have once the viewers get bored, you're probably not going to have a high success rate.
Hmm.
The Medical R&D Command, I didn't think we'd be doing anything operational. They'd be shoving tubes up every orifice they could find to find out what happens when we were on target and when we were off target. So DIA was the place we went. It was interesting. DIA is an analytical institution. They don't collect intelligence per se.
Hmm.
And we were coming over. We were going to be under the attaché section, I think AT or A, which would have been interesting because that was headed up by General Schufelt, and his wife, Charlene Schufelt, worked for me. So he would have rated me and I would have rated her, which I think may have caused
Hmm.
unique legal
Hmm.
problems. But we went over to S&T Science and Technology under Jack Verona. There were probably just four people, maybe only three, who were read in. Jack himself, the command or the deputy commander of S&T, was an Air Force full colonel. Dale Graff, who had been involved in this program years before out of Wright Pat. And of course, the director and deputy director of DIA. So nobody knew quite what we did. And we came over and we were kind of temporarily under S&T. So they just made us a placeholder, and our call sign was S&TX. Now, at DIA, when you have a single letter like X, then or whatever it is, that's headed up by a colonel. If you have S&T XA, that's headed up by a lieutenant colonel. So everybody assumed I was a colonel at the time because it was only one letter. We were in civilian clothes. They knew we did weird things, but they weren't sure what. In fact, we got a government car from DIA. We turned ours in from the Army, and we would park it out by our building, which was out in the middle of the woods. And the only thing close to it was a sergeant major's quarters. And evidently, one of the sergeant major's kids got a BB gun for Christmas, because in January, we started to have the firelight, which we would leave on at night. It'd get shot out. So we'd come in, change the light bulbs, and, didn't think anything of it. Then we came in one day, and they shot out the windshield of this government car.
Oh, my gosh.
So I reported to DIA that I set up an appointment to get a new windshield. They said, no, we'll handle that. So they set up an appointment for us to take the car in and get a new windshield, which is about half what they were going to charge us. So I said, okay, good. In the meantime, this was into spring and the summer. The building had been infested by wasps. We had all these wasps all around, big hives. So we called the post engineers, and they were going to come over and put a bomb in to kill the wasp. But the thing is, they had to do it and then come back 4 hours later and take it off, and then you couldn't be there for 48 hours because of the fumes. I said, well, no problem. We'll just close the office at 1 o'clock on Friday, and then you can come and we'll let you in. And it's okay. That'll work. So as we're getting ready to clear out that Friday, I get a phone call from the logistics people at DIA. And they said, well, Bill, you're all set up to get the windshield replaced. And I said, yep. They say, curious, how did the windshield get shattered? I said, well, it got shot out. He said, got shot out. I said, yes. Yeah, I'm not thinking what's going on here. And he said, well, weren't you worried? And I said, no, the building gets shot at a lot too. And we just, change light bulbs or whatever. And about that time, Paul Smith hollers at me. He says, Bill, we have to go. The bomb's ready to go off. Is there anything else you need? He said, no, go ahead.
Oh, my goodness.
So there must have been some good stories told about that down at
I'll bet.
at the DIAC.
Yeah, you guys made an impression, I'm sure.
Yes.
So was this overall like a positive for the program, in your opinion? Did DIA make some like much needed changes, or was it like a unnecessary oversight or something like that?
Yep. I'm going to say it probably was neutral. We stayed at DIA up till the very end, when we went over to the CIA for one day and John Deutsch canceled it. So,
oh my gosh.
Yep. It worked okay at DIA. Yep. When General Stubblebine was the commander of INSCOM, he kind of felt like, I think he thought he was my operations officer. And he would call me and say, Bill, I'm coming up Thursday night about 1900 hours. I said, okay, sir. Say, we got to work and get everybody in. And we set up butcher blocks with all the cases we were working on and successes, whatever. And he'd come up in the middle of winter, and he would leave his aide and driver out in the car, and I'd send somebody out to get them and bring them into the other building, give them coffee, whatever. He'd sit down, and we'd get ready to brief him, and it never happened. He would start off and say, yeah, Bill, I had a dream the other night. I said, yes, sir. Said, do you know what was in the dream? No, sir. He says, I dreamed of a black cat. I said, okay, sir. Said, that black cat ate the world. I said, yes, sir. I said, what do you make of that? Well, yeah, that's one mean cat, sir. And we'd go, and then he'd leave, and we hadn't briefed him on anything.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. But I would usually head down and talk to a GS-15, Wally Del Toro, who I knew from Europe, just to let him know who we were working for. Yeah, being out there by ourselves was kind of a lonely feeling.
Mm-hmm. I'll bet. Yeah, I've seen a picture of that wooden building. It was in Paul's book, and it's kind of forlorn looking, honestly.
Yeah. It was the old INSCOM headquarters company operations office, and the other building was the mess hall. But it was interesting when Colonel Busby was there. he made his office in the chief cook's office, which was, not huge or anything. And we had this huge room in the back, which we used for a conference room. I kept trying to move his desk back there. Yeah. And he kept saying no, because he'd have a better office then than all the generals did. So as soon as Colonel Busby left, the gang got together. I came in one morning and they had moved my desk back there. So I had this huge conference room, a general officer's desk. Very nice. In fact, General Schufeld came in one time and said, "Bill, your office is twice as nice as mine and 4 times as big." Yes, sir.
Wow. So, Bill, you were there to the very end of the program, is that right?
No, I was there 3.5 years, 87. The project ran on until 94 and 95. Paul stayed there pretty much then. Lynn Buchanan stayed there. The difference, I think, I had the option. Branch called me and said, "Bill, look, you just transferred from Army to DIA." I was well over 20 years. I could have retired. Said, "No, if you want to stay there, I'll leave you there. Or if you want to go someplace else, let me know." So I said, "Well, let me talk to the family." Family said Munich would be good, because I was a major, so they had great quarters for field grade officers. So, and Munich's a lovely city. There was no job I really wanted there. It would be staff work, which I hate. But I said, "Well, if you can get me to Munich." He said, "Okay," because I think with Paul and some of the other guys, they're remote viewers first, intelligence officers and soldiers second and third. I think I'm a soldier, an intelligence officer, and then a remote viewer. And I see. I really miss the come and go of intelligence operations. Ended up, I got a phone call. No, I got a message saying I've been transferred from Munich to Kaiserslautern. So the family went from being ecstatic to not talking to me. Kaiserslautern had a bad reputation, undeserved, I'll have to say. And then I got a phone call saying, "Look at Bill, we're looking at you. Do you speak German?" I said, "Yes." "Looking at you to take over command of one of the 2 CI companies in Europe. You'll be in the Netherlands. It's a pretty plush assignment." I had about 150 CI agents and support personnel. I had everybody in the northern 2/3 of Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg all fell under us. Wow. I was happy. And I did that for 3 years. Then down the street from us, there was a NATO unit, NATO MI unit. I knew most. In fact, I knew everybody there. And they provided, it was the 650th MI group of the U.S. Army. Their NATO name is Allied Command Europe Counterintelligence Activity. And they provided all CI support to NATO. And they'd been trying to catch the AFSENT, Allied Forces Central Europe spy, for 2 or 3 years. I had sent people TDY while I was commanding the U.S. unit. So they came over and said, "Look, if you want to retire," talking to me and my 2 senior NCOs, "we'll hire you on as civilians to catch the AFSENT spy," which I got to stay in Europe. So we went ahead and did that. And we went over to NATO, which was kind of a shock. But I spent 10 years there. So I spent over 20 years in Europe, 10 years conducting operations with the U.S. and 10 years conducting operations for NATO. The thing with NATO is that anything you're going to do is going to be bilateral. You go to address, it's going to be U.S., us, the 650th. It's going to be the sending country, the UK, Germany, Netherlands, and probably the host country that's happening in. So it could be trilateral. And we did catch the AFSENT spy eventually. And the thing
was this Conrad or is this somebody else?
It was a general officer from another country. And we gave them our evidence. They allowed me to sit in on the interrogation, which was in French, but they translated for me. And they asked him, "Have you had contact with the KGB?" And he said, "Yes." So you can see the time frame on this. He said, "Yes." And then they asked him, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I buy a lot of art, and KGB has access to a lot of art." And they said, "Okay." And they, to my knowledge, they never prosecuted him, but they pulled
Oh
his
my goodness.
clearance. And yeah, well, the thing is, yeah, we had the same problem with the French a couple times where we had somebody was obviously spying. It would have been a loss of face to prosecute. So they
Okay, well,
handled
that's
it.
the most important thing.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing, I
But
guess. My gosh.
yep,
So a NATO general was a recruited KGB asset, and he was not prosecuted.
no.
That's amazing.
As far as I know, I don't know what the Belgians did later. But once again, we don't. Yeah, NATO doesn't prosecute. We do the case. And this, I work closely with the Dutch counterintelligence, the BFV. We put our cases together and passed it over to them with all the information.
Mm-hmm.
And it never, to my knowledge, and I can't say that it didn't come to trial later. It very well might have, but they didn't make a big stink of it because it would have been embarrassing.
Wow.
And
So this is not ringing a bell for me at all. Did this story ever go public to your knowledge, Bill?
no,
I can't.
no, this is the first time that I think it's been admitted.
Right now with me?
Yep, I think this is. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
I'm
I
honored.
don't think my two senior NCOs, one of whom died a couple of years back, was a very good friend. I don't think they've ever talked about it. So it's
Oh my goodness.
well,
Wow.
some of the people at the 650th headquarters were, of course, they were monitoring the case, and we passed the case through them over to the Belgians when we resolved it. And maybe the guy was innocent. Maybe he just contacted the KGB to get art. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I can't say he was guilty. He never went to trial to my knowledge.
Yeah, I understand that he has not been found guilty, whoever he is.
Yes.
One interview doesn't say everything. I understand that, but I'm extremely intrigued, to say the least, right now. I would love to look that guy up after this if I can and see if anything came of it from his career, but I'm also kind of not surprised that was hushed up because that would be extraordinarily embarrassing.
Yes. So we did a lot of that, but I did 10 years with them. Working out of, I eventually, after the first year in Holland, I moved out to Geilenkirchen, NATO A3. It was a NATO air base, and worked out of there, covering Geilenkirchen and also any place else they needed me. So I got to see an awful lot of Europe during that 10 years.
Sounds like it. And you were based in the Netherlands that entire time, is that correct?
I lived in the Netherlands for 13 years, 3 years,
oh my gosh,
commanding the U.S. unit. The first year I was at the headquarters of Region 4, and then I moved over for the last 9 years off to Geilenkirchen, but it was a 25-minute drive. The border had opened up by that time.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds wonderful, honestly. It sounds like you were just in the right place.
Yeah. And my wife was the alcohol and drug consular for the Netherlands. So.
Oh, wow. Both have important roles to play.
Yep.
Very cool. So you mentioned that you transitioned. So was it I wouldn't say as simple, but was it as fast as like you left work, in uniform and like the very next work day you were back as a civilian, or did you have to take time off or go back to Huachuca or something like that?
Most of my time was in civilian clothes. So I wore the same sport coat in, and it took a couple of months to get everything through. And then I came back to work, and I was responsible for me. And I normally knew where I was. I'd been used to getting phone calls saying, "What's going on up at Bremerhaven?" I would say, "Well, I don't know anything going on, but you must think you do. So why don't you tell me what you know, and then I'll talk to them." Yeah. So, but yeah, I did spend a lot of time. I spent 10 more years as a civilian there, and then 10 years in White Sands, New Mexico, providing counterintelligence support to New Mexico, which was people don't realize the importance of that state. Awful lot of classified technology comes out of there. They have national labs, Sandia, they have Army, Air Force national labs, and then Los Alamos, the nuclear program. So it was thoroughly enjoyed that. There are a lot of classified contracts on the Indian reservations.
Really?
Yes.
Really interesting.
Yep.
I have not been there yet. We just did an episode about the nuclear program just a couple of weeks ago. Yes. And, incredible history. And I've heard that New Mexico is an incredibly beautiful state as well.
It is.
So
I'd still be
a great
there.
Place to be.
Yeah. But my grandkids came to Wisconsin.
Oh, I see. Well, yeah, I can understand how that would be a priority now.
Yep.
So I understand your sons were also in Army intelligence, weren't they?
Yes, I had two sons, Robbie and Sean. Both are retired intelligence soldiers, NCOs. Rob was a intel analyst, and Sean was a counterintelligence agent, much like I was.
Hmm.
Yeah, Rob, when I was with the NATO unit, Rob was the intelligence NCO for the whole unit down in Belgium, about 2 hours away. He did that for 2 years, which made his mother very happy. It was a 2 hour drive to come see us.
Oh
And
yeah,
then my
yeah, I
son
bet.
Sean came over and was down in Heidelberg for about 8 months, running cases for them, catching them up, basically personal security investigation. So that
Oh,
was
cool.
nice. And
So
then,
all three of you were close by for a brief period there, is that
yes,
right?
yep.
Oh man,
And,
that's incredible.
yep. And then when I started deploying, 2005 through 2013, when I deployed in 2006, I was with the 101st again, was the division, and Sean was at a subordinate brigade, 3rd Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division up in Mosul. I was down at Tikrit, so I got to go up and see him. His wife was up there, and at the time, Rob was in Kabul in Afghanistan. I'd go and I could talk to Rob by phone or go visit Sean, or they would come down. I noticed I went to see them, and Sean had this shoes housing unit he lived in, and he had boxes everywhere that my wife was sending him. Rob mentioned he was getting all kinds of boxes also. I figured, well, I got a box, last month. Must be a bunch more in the mail coming for me, and they didn't come. So I finally got to a phone, and I called Sandy, and I said, "Yeah, the kids are very happy with all the boxes they're getting." She said, "Oh, that's good." I said, "But they're getting 20, 30 boxes, and I'm getting an occasional one." And she said, "Well, I'm not having any more sons, but I can always get another husband." Okay.
Oh my gosh, you got you there, Bill.
Yeah. As
Wow.
long as you know
Wow.
where the priorities are.
Yep, yep, yep. That's great. That's amazing that you it sounds like unlike anybody else just about, you'd be able to speak pretty freely about your work with your sons, and I guess to a certain extent with your
Yep.
wife too, if she was employed there
Yep.
on
Yep.
base. I mean, most guys got to close that stuff off as soon as they leave the
Yep.
office.
Well, with the sons, yes. With the base, she couldn't talk because she was counseling alcoholics and drug addicts. So
Oh
she
yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
tell me that. And I couldn't talk about what we were doing. So,
Oh, I see.
yeah, only thing we could talk about was the kids.
Hmm. Amazing. And funny, bringing up work right now, I have to ask, could you have imagined, back in like 85 or so, could you have imagined that one day that you'd be, doing recorded interviews about Stargate
No,
from
never.
start to
No,
finish for anybody?
no. Yeah.
Times have changed.
I thought we'd be secret forever.
Hmm.
I suppose there are probably several thousand remote viewers out there now doing all kinds of different technologies. I expect with the pressure being put on the envelope, hopefully there'll be another breakthrough soon.
Hmm.
Yep. In fact, I'm teaching a extended remote viewing class tomorrow.
Oh, okay. So you're still involved then, right now.
Yeah, I got back in. I was never trained in ERV, was the thing. I had watched Joe do ERV, and I'd been in the room, in the control room, monitoring him. Well, Skip was monitoring him in the room. We would put sensors on Joe's skin, and when Joe was on target, his polarity, his body polarity would reverse, go from a positive to a negative. And so I eventually we practiced, and I learned how to do that. And then after Joe left, all we had was CRVers. We had no ERVers in the unit. So I
Hmm.
got with Skip and said, "Look, we really could use another ERVer, and I'd like that to be me." I said, "Okay, let's start Monday." And I said, "Great." So I came in Monday, and I thought I was going to be trained, and I ended up in a dark room. And Skip said, "Tell me when you're ready." And it was an outbounder target with Paul and Charlene Schufelt, and I hit him. I was amazed at the way it worked, and from then on, I would prefer to work ERV constantly.
Hmm.
Yep. As I said,
Very
it
cool.
takes about 9 months to be operational, I would think, for CRV. And I came in Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, I think I was operational.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Yeah. Well,
Incredible.
I've also learned how to CRV too, though. So
Sure, sure.
that's that.
That's a big help, I'm sure.
I'm probably cheating a bit there.
Wow. So you mentioned you're teaching a class tomorrow. Are you still doing this pretty much full time, or is that like an
No,
ad hoc
no, no.
basis?
Listen, I have trained friends. I have several friends who were CRVers who've come by, and I'll take about a week and we'll do about a day of class, and then we'll work targets for 4 days. And I'll do about an hour before each class and bring them up to speed. Really had pretty good success. In fact, that's to say, didn't know, I didn't teach ERV for the longest time because I was never taught it. I just did it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I used to be the MC at all the International Remote Viewing Association conferences one a year when I wasn't deployed. Pam Coronado was president or vice president of the IRVA for a long time.
Hmm.
Pam is a psychic detective. You'll see her on the Discovery Channel or the A&E Channel, whatever. We would do a dog and pony show about ERV just to keep the technology alive, basically, and to keep the interest in. And Pam did teach some courses. And we were up in New York, I think it was about 21. We did this dog and pony show. At the end, hadn't prepared it or anything, but we went ahead and put it out. That was October. I got a phone call from Pam in December and said, Bill, do you want to teach a ERV course with me? And I thought, and I said, well, okay, Pam, yep, I can do some research and I'll try to get some of Gene Lessman's work here. And Pam said, well, yep. I said, when do you want to do this? And she said, Sunday. And it was like Wednesday. I said, okay. And we're going to do it. It was, the virus. So I said, we're going to do it Zoom. How many students do you have? And she said, 50. I said, well, let's stop right there. And we did it. The first one was before Christmas. We did a 2-hour block, basically talking about meditation, preparing yourself, and that kind of thing. Then we took a 2-week break, and we gave people a chance to do it. The 2-week break was Christmas and New Year's. We brought them back, and we did another 2-hour class. And I had worked Sandy on a site and taped it ERV-wise so they could see how a session should go. And we did that. And then we gave them a target. The first one we gave them was the UN building in New York. And we had some success, more than I expected we were going to have. And we gave them another target, and we went over the first target. Everybody had sent their stuff in, and we went over everybody's 25 people had worked the target. And we went over what everybody did, what's wrong, what happened. You were on target, but you got off here. And we did it the next week, and we did it one last time. And that last time, 25 people out of 25 got the target. Now, they all didn't stay on target. Some got it and then looked for something else, which was, I think to be expected. But about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 did outstanding. They found the target, they got the information, they stayed in the target. And I think it was a castle in Greece that Pam had visited. It was an old, 2,500 years old, but it had a very modern bookstore there, gift shop. So it wasn't an easy target because there was the 2 blend of time there. But 7 people just did amazing. And one person named John Cook nailed it. So started teaching ERV again.
Very cool. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great entree back into it.
Yep. So I've had very good success, mainly with relatives and friends. I'm not charging. I'm not looking at starting a business. I'm just trying to keep it alive. And CRV's become kind of the darling. And we'll give them an alternate, something different than CRV.
Yeah, totally understandable. It's a fascinating discipline. So other than that, you're mostly just enjoying retirement and enjoying your grandkids now?
I was working up till about last year. I've had semi-bad back from too many bad parachute jumps. Actually, the jumps were okay. It was the landings that hurt.
Right.
But, my daughter has in town. We live in a little village of about 1,000 people. And my daughter has a coffee sandwich shop. I used to work there, maybe 10, 15 hours a week just to get out. My wife and I volunteer out at a rehab facility, alcohol and drug treatment. So we spend time out
Oh, that's
there.
great.
I'm doing a podcast right now.
Right.
Actually, I don't know how or why, but I do manage to stay busy.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah, you got a lot going on at all times, it sounds like.
Yes.
And I'm really glad that you were able to squeeze me in. Honestly, I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad that we got a chance to talk and to maybe offer a little different viewpoint on certain things that happened over the years.
Yeah, certainly. Bill, is there any way for people to kind of keep up with your journey or your training or anything like that now? Or are you pretty much low-key, like not online?
I'm online. I don't do training. Say the training I'm doing is for friends and relatives.
Yeah, I don't want to send a bunch of potential students your way.
I'm not looking to get students. I'm not looking to make any money doing it.
Right.
Now, I coach my granddaughter's soccer team for 6 seasons. I spend a lot of time out at the alcohol drug treatment facilities. And then I work with a bunch of high school and college girls at my daughter's coffee sandwich shop. I was thinking when I die, my funeral is going to be very confusing. I think there'll be some old vets there, some new age people, and then there'll be a bunch of druggies and alcoholics, hopefully recovering, and then a bunch of teenage or very young girls. And
oh, wow.
People will go to
everybody's going to be looking around wondering who everybody else is.
Yeah.
Dang, well, that's a pretty good legacy if all of those different diverse groups of people are there to celebrate you.
Well, now I'm saying that there may just be Sandy there, and if it goes like it did with the boxes, she may not even come.
Oh my gosh! Right. Dang. Well, Bill, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time, and it sounds like you had an absolutely fascinating career both in and out of uniform. No question about it.
A lot of fun. Yep, I didn't cover what we did when I commanded the A Company 527th, but that's maybe save that for a future podcast.
Yeah, maybe a part 2 one day. We've had people come back on occasionally, so that's always possible.
Okay, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Bill. Take care.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Pleasure. Very much so.
If you're interested in more of Spycraft 101, look for my page on Instagram at Spycraft 101. You can also find more great articles on my website, spycraft101.com. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll stick around because there's lots more to come.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The stories and statements expressed herein are experiences and opinions. They may not reflect the views of the host or the production studio. It's okay if you disagree with our content. No piece of media is right for everyone. If you love Spycraft 101, please check us out online, on Instagram, on YouTube, and especially on Patreon. Thank you for listening.